I have there's the term context graph has its origins in at least 2019, and I found the people that used it. And it's not exactly the same, but conceptually to me, it is the same thing. Like what they were talking about is what we're talking about today and the effect that they are trying to achieve. And I managed to set up a meeting with this person for next week. So I'm going to find out what were they thinking with the term context graph back in 2019? What was their vision for it? And why are we just, why did it go away or did it not really go away? Did they give one talk on it and nobody cared? So it just they let it go. Uh, so much more on this coming
Nate,
very, very soon. We're going to
amazing.
dive into, but I think that's such an interesting topic though, is um, somebody on Reddit actually posted about like why is this context graph thing exploding so much? And I actually responded to it and said, people post content all the time. We post content all the time. And this has, since this has happened, our website traffic is more than 10x. We were trending on GitHub. Uh, we're seeing like my video on YouTube, what is a context graph is, very, very steady traffic to it. And what, and I see the data. What this tells me is this hit a nerve because we saw this one time before. When we posted our ontology features, uh, that became the top post in our knowledge graph on Reddit all time for that sub. And I can promise you, I did not anticipate that. I thought, I honestly thought that was going to be another one of those, you get we get a couple of views, maybe a couple likes, that's about it. And there was just this outpouring of people saying, well, this is what I've been working on. This is what I've been looking for. And I'm thinking, well, where have you been? Where have you been? Well, we didn't know this. And that's kind of what I've seen is that when you hit something that people actually, I know it's not very reassuring because, I know a lot of people. Matter of fact, I actually have all random things. I ran into the Twitter influencer Robert Scoble yesterday and had a long conversation with him and kind of said, how do you do this? How do you get consistency in promoting? And he kind of shrugged and said, you just have to, it takes a lot of work and you have to keep at it. And I mean, honestly, that's kind of what we've been doing. And then when you finally hit something that people actually have an interest in, it'll be obvious. There won't be any like, gee, I wonder, is this something that people are interested in? Like it's overwhelming. The data is just night and day.
Yeah, yeah, and let's okay, very cool. You're right. It struck a nerve, and then that led to me starting to go. I want to talk about this as well. So, and then we're just gonna talk about a few things if this ever gets published on Spotify or places where people can't see us. I'm
Hmm.
Ian Pilon. I'm the author of a book called Cultivating Clarity, which is about contextual intelligence, or at least how I framed it in an abstract level. And
Hmm.
then this
Hmm.
was before the term context engineering hit. And then I'd
Yeah.
love to talk to you about that in a little bit because now
Hmm.
context
Hmm.
graphs caught on. But I think underneath all of this, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the subject of context in order to get signal from noise. So I'm Ian Pilon, and with me is Daniel Davis. And our guest today is you're coming from San Francisco, right, Dan?
Yes. Yes.
I believe
That's
you're
right.
doing
That's right.
your own thing. It says
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
co-founder, CEO of something going on. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but if you do, that's fine. But we do know it's you're the also co-founder of Trust Graph, and we'll get into that. But maybe
Yeah.
help the
Yeah.
audience get an intro of you, who you are, so you can let us know all
Oh
about you.
boy, that's a well. I could go a long time on that. How much do you want? I can
Uh,
derail this
no,
pretty
let's do
quickly.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
What's that? 2 minutes.
2 minutes
Man,
is good.
man. You
High
making me
level. High.
distill myself down to 2 minutes. How
That's
rude.
impossible. We can't do that
I
to
know.
community.
So I'll do it. The I spent a long time in DoD aerospace in various capacities. working with systems engineering, which is kind of one of those terms that fell out of fashion, which I think a lot of the concepts of systems engineering are going to come back. What is old will become new again, which is going to be a recurring theme of this. But also, in addition to hardware and software, oh, and by the way, my academic background was actually in quantum mechanics and photonic crystals and modeling quantum systems with software, which is kind of where my algorithmic background for software comes in. Yeah, and that's another discussion too, how much the math of quantum is similar to the math underlying AI models. That gets into some really interesting discussions really quickly. But I spent a very long time doing all that kind of stuff in very interesting capacities, and ended up out here in Silicon Valley during the autonomous vehicle craze. And yeah, then I was pre and post IPO at Lyft. Got some really interesting stories from that experience, but also saw, um, people wouldn't look at Lyft and go like, that's a big data company. But one of the things that Lyft learned years ago is that if you open the app and it doesn't immediately respond, that they're just going to close and open the Uber app. So uptime and availability was absolutely critical to, absolutely tangible, people clicking away from an app took money away from the bottom line. So the infrastructure of the company was really, really important. And that's also where I met the TrustGraph co-founder Mark,
Okay.
because his company Trust Networks had actually been acquired by Lyft, and we saw this infrastructure, just how complex it was. And again, Lyft only serves the US. So you don't have, global data. So this was massive data just for a US based company that only had US customers at the time. And I don't have an exact number, but we were told that, even 5 and 6 years ago when I left Lyft in 2020, they were already had exabytes of data, actual exabytes. You know, you go back 20 years ago, I don't even think the internet was exabytes. And I would have meetings with people and they go, yeah, we got an S3 bucket that's got petabytes of data in it. We don't know what's in it. And I would go, well, that's an easy solution. If we got an S3 bucket with petabytes of data and we don't know what's in it, delete. And they go, but we see inbound and outbound traffic. And I go, well, don't we need to figure that out? And they go, absolutely. But here's the other 30 things that we're dealing with right now. Which one of these do you not want me to do? And you go, I get your point. And I realized that's when we had that realization that just how important this data infrastructure is. This has a tangible impact to the bottom line of the business. And so much of that thinking is actually uh, how we design TrustGraph is realizing that it's not just about graphs, it's not just about implementing APIs. You need a tremendous amount of infrastructure and resiliency, and then the observability and telemetry to be able to actually serve tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, tens of millions of users concurrently in a way that doesn't prevent your business from losing money. I think that
Yeah.
was more than 2 minutes.
No, no,
Sorry.
that was great. I love these backstory threads about getting to know something about you that I never knew, right? So for those that don't know, DoD, I believe, Department of Defense, and then this segue into
Oh,
Lyft, and
sorry.
then
I'm bad about using. My life has been nothing but acronyms.
I
I could drown you in acronyms.
no, that's all good. If we go in and we talk about anything complex, I'll just try to sort of like, ask you to help me understand, and that'll help anybody else in the audience who may be new. But this is the stuff that I love, Daniel, is
Mhm,
when
mhm.
I hear these backstories and these threads of how things get interconnected, and then it's so cool to hear backstories that we don't often get to hear, because if I look at your LinkedIn and your X, it's just
Well,
very surface,
it's mostly empty, which is another thing.
right?
Well,
It's so shallow, in the sense that
well,
I didn't get that narrative of
yeah.
about you, because on the digital realm, it's not a story, it's not a conversation. So this is one of the
Well,
things that I like about doing a show like this is I get
yeah,
to learn something completely new about you that I never would have known otherwise just by looking at digital
yeah,
media. So, and when
eh,
we're talking about context, I think is very
yeah,
relevant,
exactly.
leading
Well,
into this
there's
conversation.
also a good point about this too, in that um, the stuff that I worked on for so many years, you're not really supposed to talk about it. My co-founder Mark is in the same situation. Um, but it is even more. It's even simpler than that, though. I don't. Even if I were to put in there what I was doing, it would be all these acronyms and all this stuff that people would just go, I don't know what this is. It would only, 10 people would know what it was. So, that's, and again, it kind of goes back to what we're talking about context. If you don't have that context, like, for instance, back in my USAF days, I was working one role and it shifted so that I had to move a row of cubicles over. I'm in the same organization, I work with the same people, but because my role was slightly different, I get moved over to the row of cubicles next to it. And it was like I was in another world. We were using different terms to describe the same thing, new acronyms. And I literally said, like, I feel like I started a new job. This is like totally different. Like
Yeah.
I, I'm like, I just moved. Like I can stand up and I can see my old cubicle. I can see where I sat. How is this so different? And it's just totally new context.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me when I was in insurance. In Canada, we have a place called Sun Life. I was there
Hmm.
years ago. But yeah, same deal. I'd go in these different meetings.
Hmm.
And when I first started, it was just like acronym after acronym. But that becomes a language inside of that
Oh,
organization that
absolutely,
everybody else
absolutely.
catches on. And it was so cool that I had said to somebody, I said, I need to catch up on all these acronyms. People are, and they're like, well, no, there's literally like a manual and it's like
Hmm.
pages deep. I'm like,
Hmm.
wow.
Hmm.
So,
Well,
yeah,
that's
there's,
like if I had like one of my old buddies from that time here with us, me and him could have a conversation where we were going into great detail about stuff, and you'd be sitting there going like, what are you guys even talking about? Like, this is like, did you guys this just sounds like gobbledygook nonsense. And we'd be going like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's like, so you two understand what you just said to each other? Mm-hmm.
yeah, because you guys have the
It's like,
tacit knowledge.
it's like the secret decoder ring, we had
That's
the
right.
secret decoder ring.
Exactly. An outsider is not going to see the cryptic internal
Mm-hmm.
dialogue that you're having, the tacit
Well,
knowledge about previous
well,
context. So,
Well, that's even like I find that, that's a good way because, a lot of people will make claims about stuff that they used to do and used to work on, but like that come from that world, there are certain words that people will use to describe an activity. And those are contextual clues that make me go, okay, this person is using the right lingo. This person is describing this thing in the right way. That increases their credibility. Or I think this person just read about this on LinkedIn. I don't think they actually know about this stuff.
yeah, totally true. All right, this is yeah. So let's pivot into the topic at hand that kind of
Hmm.
got
Hmm.
some viral storm over
Hmm. Hmm.
over December, which was the
Right over the holidays.
yeah, right. And then if I do a screen share, let's see how this works with Riverside. But just so that I have visual
Hmm.
context to go with it, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try and go. Oh no, I have a pop-up I have to sort out. One second.
Well, so
Side approved.
you can actually do this in the edit too. If you want to overlay a slide, you can do it total in the edit. You don't need to do it now unless you just want to give me context for it.
Um, yeah, I'm gonna cancel. I'll do it later because it's
Hmm.
asking me to quit because it needs permissions, and I really don't want to do the editing later, Daniel. One of the things I was trying to well, I tried before was like just going live, and not everybody
Yeah.
likes that. Yeah. But I'm trying to avoid doing post-production work. I just want to talk to people and
Hmm.
ship it on the air as soon as possible. Actually, I've been debating about calling this show just in time, like something
Oh,
related
okay.
to this, where I believe the future of memetics is going to get faster
You
and
know,
faster. Just want to
we
talk to people and go, what's going on?
we actually tossed around using the term just in time knowledge, at one point with trust graph, but
Oh, I love it.
but so the supply chain people definitely get it, but it's it's like, did other people get it? Which, interestingly, you mentioned earlier about context engineering. So
So
that's another term. So I guess it was either mid last year or earlier. I totally changed the messaging for TrustGraph to be context engineering platform, context engineering, context engineering, context engineering. Did did not see any bump whatsoever. So it seems like, and I actually looked at some of the search engine history for that term. It kind of had like gone up and then gone back down. So, is this the moment now where context engineering finally has that sticky moment where it sticks? I don't know. And I don't, because I've seen it I've seen it waver.
Yeah,
But I think
then
it's the right term. I do think it's the right term to describe the problem.
if you want to think about it as a layer where there's a cohort of people that sort of frame the idea at that layer. So, and what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that is like when I went with the term contextual intelligence, I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be careful not to get pigeonholed into a certain layer. I wanted to
Yeah.
not go so deep and concrete that I'm claiming to know everything about context and engineering, but I
Mm-hmm.
also didn't want to be like way abstract because context is literally in everything that nobody can grab a handle on it. So I sort of shaped it around product, but then
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go at it from the direction of context to help you understand something by taking into consideration the things around it. That's Jeff
Mm-hmm.
Jonah's sort of framing, and I loved it. I haven't felt something better than that, so I'm just sort of keeping going along with Jeff's, uh, I guess, framing of that. And then the
Well, so
intelligence side, I just sort of use it as problem solving. So and
Mhm,
there's so many ways to unpack that, but from the way that I look at intelligence, I also share the same sentiment as Michael Levin in my book, who talks about
mhm,
the Williams James definition, which is to achieve goals by sometimes alternate methods to achieve the same goal. So I really looked at contextual, so
mhm,
context as a way of thinking about if you use it in a problem solving
mhm,
methodology, the better context, not necessarily more, but the
mhm.
richer and more
Right,
nuanced and tightly coupled information around something you're trying to comprehend, the faster you can make sense of it and get the signal out, right? But
right.
okay, yeah, and then let's pivot back to what you were saying there, Daniel. Yeah, so context engineering gets all this hype before the graph
Mhm,
thing does, and then you're right, it dies off, and then context graph comes out. And the image I did want to share that I didn't is Jaya's post, where AI's $1 trillion opportunity, context
mhm,
graphs, and then boom, everybody starts posting responses
mhm.
to that, including you, including Kirk Marple, as well as
Oh, there's
others.
been
I
a
already
lot. Oh yeah, I've had people reach out to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're here, and this, for everybody who's listening in, is this evolution of semantics around this idea about
Yeah.
context coming into play, and obviously AI is a huge part of that. So maybe then, Daniel, help us get your perspective, as so many people have been jumping in on this, and as well, for people that don't know, Daniel has posted a couple responses to this thread, literally, and I read it and I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about too. Let's get him on the show and hear your perspective. So,
You might want to tell Jaya that.
yeah. So, how about how how about you sort of give us your perspective now from that jump off point that hits in December?
Mhm.
You chime in on it. Kirk chimes in on it. A bunch of other people do. But
Yeah.
what's your position and take on the thread, and why you feel like you had to uh, uh, say something about it, and how you framed it any different, and what did you like and what did you not like?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think, let me start off by saying, what you're describing is really the problem that we've been trying to set out to solve, from the very beginning. It's not about more context. It's about how do you find the right context for driving action, for driving decisions, for achieving a desired outcome. And this is, people have been researching this for 60 to 70 years. Graph theory is not new. Some people called it semantic networks. There've been a lot of different terms, and we've seen that also ebb and flow a lot as well. Now, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the semantic web came about, and we got, RDF, that all of a sudden kind of created a new, a new world of graphs. But, then I think, and we could ask him, I'm not sure, but the biggest champion, I think, of the term knowledge graph, at least in the last, recent years, has been Neo4j, and specifically, their CTO, Philip Rathla. I mean, I've had lunches with Philip where he talked about how, that's where, that's been they've really tried to own that term knowledge graph. And, the Trust Graph co-founder, Mark, he very much likes the term knowledge graph. And full disclosure, and Mark would be the first one to tell you this, I don't like the term knowledge graph.
Okay.
And here's why. If you get 5 people and you ask them to tell you what knowledge is, you're going to get 5 different definitions.
Yeah.
So when everybody doesn't have the same context and perspective of what knowledge is, then how do you apply that to a graph? And it's so interesting because when this article gets published about context graphs, and I read it and I go, well, this is what we've been doing for you. This has been the entire mission of Trust Graph. But some of the things in it were like, well, this doesn't really align up with, graph theory, information theory. So, that's why, I wrote what I call the context graph manifesto, to try to provide that historical context, to provide, why people were thinking of this way, why people have been trying to solve this problem. And I think what we're seeing is that people kind of have a common understanding now of the word context. So when you attach that to the word graph, people all of a sudden go, oh, I think I know what this is. So it still kind of falls under the umbrella of knowledge graph, but people kind of see that as this, ambiguous thing that they're not really sure what it is. But then a context graph, they thought they did. And then, you get into the whole evangelical army, you get into, RDF style graphs, property graphs, reification. And, again, none of this is new. These are concepts that go back in information theory and graph theory beyond decades. People have been trying to solve these problems as long as people have been interested in information and data and the concept of computing.
Yeah. And this is all right. So now everybody's getting caught up to that, where this is all
Mm-hmm.
sort of getting a lot of traction now. And for those that haven't read the full piece of your manifesto, help us understand the structure of what you're trying to put together with that. If somebody's obviously not reading it on
Yeah.
X right now,
Yeah.
how would you
Hmm.
summarize what
Hmm.
that post was about?
Well, a lot of that post was about trying to level set and, talk about how what we're really talking about are graphs, but then what really are graphs and why does that matter? And that's where I'm already seeing a lot of confusion
Yeah.
because, like I said, I talked about, RDF graphs, the semantic web. I talked about property graphs. I've talked about, reification. But I think one of the points I'm really seeing a lot of confusion on is, for some reason, people started thinking about context graphs as being this thing you create at a point in time that's kind of ephemeral, that you generate and then it goes away. And I've been kind of raising my hand saying like, whoa, 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 this is not how you use graphs. You can have a trillion node and edge graph that you query and use graph retrieval algorithms and graph analytics to retrieve a subgraph. But that's not this, thing in and of itself. You're just retrieving information from the graph. And again, this is not new. This is the way people have been operationalizing graphs for decades. And I think one of the things that's really, really, really getting ignored is, not only is this technology not new, it's in use every day. We have industries where this is, bread and butter to their industry. Google search. I don't know that it is today. I think they've kind of changed how Google search works a little bit, but Google search was graph technology. Like if you ever meet somebody that worked in Google search, deep within the Google search organization, they are graph experts, and they were very quick. Oh yeah, this is how all of this works. Because schema.org is an ontology. Schema.org is an ontology. And how many people that did SEO, back in the day, you went to schema.org and you took that and you put those enhancements in your website. That's an ontology for a graph. That's how that worked. Oil and gas, believe it or not, is a huge consumer of graph technology. Banking, all fraud detection, like every time you try to do a credit card transaction, you have these massive graphs that are getting queried to make a determination within, like less than a second, is this a fraudulent transaction or not? Like in any company that has any sort of consumer facing product, you have fraud teams that have really big graphs that that's how they do this. Every single time there's an interaction, they're retrieving information from the graph and they're using that information to make some sort of decision. So why all of a sudden would somebody try to give that a new term when that's just how graphs have always been operationalized? You have a graph and you query it, you perform analytics on it, and you
Yeah,
retrieve a subgraph, and then you process and make your decision. And that was a lot of my point to the context graph manifesto, is that you have to me. So I had a definition. My definition of a context graph is it's a graph structure that is optimized for usage with AI. To me, it's as simple as that, because you have lots of knowledge graphs, you have lots of different graphs that are tailored for specific use cases. A context graph is one that's built and structured specifically because you want to retrieve information from it to be able to provide to an AI system to perform autonomous work.
gotcha. Very, very cool. So I want to ask you another question, but now that one led to another one.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
in your framing, and I love where we're going with this. Like we've already like unpacked
Hmm.
context on its
Hmm.
own, and now we're going into the graph world all on its own. And you have such a rich history with it. This is amazing. So but the framing there, you left us with the idea that this is to communicate with LLMs or AI.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
does
Hmm.
that mean like, in the world of traditional graphs before the LLM moment, I guess we can get data to talk to data in different ways.
Right.
So
Right.
now moving into the world of LLMs, and I've been trying to keep up with the rate of change here to try to reconfigure some websites and stuff so that they can talk to agents.
Hmm.
Does a graph now has the same fundamental ontology and all that, but is there a way that we're changing the code under the hood so that agents can traverse graphs with um, different ways that the data is defined? Is that a thing or
Well, I mean, that's a lot of what we were doing, with Trust Graph. And I think that's a little bit of a misunderstanding I think some people are having with this idea of context graphs. That they maybe thought, oh, well, I'm just going to give an agent a graph and it's going to read it. I'm like, whoa, 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 no, 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 no. That's, this thing probably has a trillion nodes and edges.
yeah,
I guess that's a misunderstanding, is you can't read a graph. That's not the intent. And I think also part of the challenge is there's no one right way to do this. There's lots of ways to do this. And it's a very tribal knowledge kind of approach that you're not going to find a lot of good resources on it. So again, that's why I've been doing, I've been talking about this so much, is to try to, it's like, okay, I know everybody's interested in this, but there's a lot of stuff we need to talk about. There's a lot of stuff that you've probably never seen before that's going to help you understand how to actually make this stuff work for you. And to talk about one of your points is like, because what you're really asking is like, well, how do people do this? And it's actually easy to build a graph. Building graphs is the easy part. The hard part is getting data out of the graph. And this is where anybody that's ever like tried to work with graphs, and they've had a bad experience, is probably because they went, well, I built the graph, but now I don't understand how they can say like you can get all these relationships, and I don't understand how you do all that. And the way that's been done up until now, really, is that you would have teams of engineers that would spend maybe 6 months, 8 months, 12 months building specific retrieval algorithms for how you've structured your graph. And the big name that everybody knows that this is their business model is Palantir. This is what Palantir does. That's the term forward deployed engineers. Let's be honest with what it is. They're consultants. Palantir is no different than a Accenture or a Deloitte, whereas you hire them and they come in and they will structure your data in a custom struct.
They
What's
get
that?
visibility to they get visibility inside of private walls, right? So
Yeah.
that
Well, but
gives
what
them
they, well,
rich
but what they,
context in order to engineer a very hyper-specific solution. Sorry to cut you off,
well,
Daniel. Go ahead.
well, not well, but well, that's what they tell people. But that's not what they do. So
Oh,
again, they'll take your data. So okay, so again, if you go back 20 years ago, they actually Palantir's original thesis was data transformation and structuring and retrieval has been solved. And the only thing that really is the differentiator is the dashboarding, the user experience, how the user interacts with it. That was their thesis 20 years ago. And it wasn't true then, and it's not true now.
okay.
Being able to take massive amounts of data, being able to structure it, and then have ways that you can retrieve that data up until now has been all these manual processes. And that's what Palantir would do. That's what their forward deployed engineers do is they get a client and they have specific data needs and they just manually build this stuff over the course of a year, if not longer. And the difference is now LLMs actually enable us to do this now. For instance, in Trust Graph, you can take your data and it will build graphs and be able to retrieve from those graphs with no knowledge whatsoever of it. It's what we call our naive process. Or if you bring your own ontologies or the industry standard ontologies, which there are thousands of, you can now ingest your data, and this is all autonomous. You don't. This is nothing has to be built. It will build a graph using that ontology, and then it will use that ontology for how it actually retrieves data from the graph. And there's no building required. You don't have to spend 12 months building retrieval algorithms that are based on the ontology and the data. And but this is how the graph industry has worked for the last 10 to 20 years, is that people would come in and they would bring custom ontologies or they would design their own. And then you have to design specific retrieval for what you've built. And this is kind of why graph technology hasn't really exploded in scales, because there was so much manual building that was required. LLMs are a tool now that the graph world has been looking for from the very beginning and didn't know that they needed it, because an LLM can read both human readable context and machine readable context, process them all so that not only can it build the graph and understand the semantic relationships and understand the human designed ontologies, it can then understand how to retrieve that information as well. And then you layer on top of that the decades of graph retrieval algorithms and graph analytics for anomaly detection, clustering, communities, path traversal. Do you want to choose the shortest path between two nodes? Do you want to choose the longest path between two nodes? Do you want to be able to specify how many hops you make amongst related information? You know, so many fully mature algorithms that do all of this. And now we're able to give that to a technology that can actually do this without us spending 12 months building this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so to tie that back to your point earlier, which you said humans, or you didn't say humans, but you can't read graphs, and I took it as, which is true. Humans, it's a data visualization mechanism for me to try and make meaning out of data.
Right.
So
I-
exactly,
It's
I can't just read
it
it. But I think what you
right.
just said is though LLMs can, right? So is that true? Is that
Well,
how you're seeing
well,
a shift?
well, you couldn't give an LLM. Well, okay, so I can give an LLM a novel, and it can read the novel. Um, I can't really say, "Here's a graph. Go read the graph."
Oh, okay,
But what
gotcha.
I could do. So here's what I could do. Say you have SQL tables, and there's a schema for that SQL table. You could give the LLM the schema and say, like, "Well, this is how my SQL table is structured." That's kind of, and this is where people all of a sudden the word ontology has really come back into play, because if you a schema for a SQL table, its analog for the graph world would be an ontology. So I can give an LLM an ontology. So now it would have an idea about how the graph is structured. So it could begin to query the graph with much more precision and accuracy. So I'll give you some examples of this. So the naive process that we use in TrustGraph actually uses vector embeddings for semantic similarity search. So what we do, this is how we started out with TrustGraph, is that we would build the graphs, and then we would map vector embeddings to the nodes and edges, so that when a user makes a request, you perform a semantic similarity search as a way to seed how you start generating subgraphs from the graph, because otherwise, how else would you know where to start? But now that people are taking an interest in ontologies, if you know that ontology, you can begin to query the graph in a different way, in a much more precise and accurate way, by knowing the ontology. But there's a big but here. There's a big, big but, big elephant in the room. Most people, when they think of graphs, they think of property graphs, because to Neo4j's credit, they are the market leader in graphs by a mile. I think there's a website called DB Engine or something like that, that actually kind of ranks database systems. And when you go to the graph one, Neo4j they have incredible market share, but they are a property graph. And property graphs are not conducive to ontologies. Ontologies are RDF style graphs. Now, can you do an RDF style graph in a property graph? Yes. We actually do it in Trust Graph. We do that
What's
translation.
an RDF
But
style? Sorry, Daniel. What's an RDF style?
RDF is not, this is actually why I've been making a lot of my content. RDF is not easy to learn. It's called a resource description framework. It doesn't even have it doesn't have good names for any of it. It's the semantic web. The semantic web comes out of RDF. So RDF is where
Yes.
you do, it's just subject, predicate, object, but there's a structure to it. And you have URNs, which are typically URLs, and you have syntactical rules. And not only that, you have multiple languages that you use to work with RDF, whether it's RDF XML, whether it's N triples, whether it's JSON LD, or the most human readable, which is actually called Turtle. And unfortunately, if you're probably thinking, well, how do I learn Turtle? You better find somebody that knows it, because if you do a Google search, most of the stuff oh, really?
Yeah,
So,
probably Seymour. I forget the author's name, but it's the oldest book, probably in my library. No, it's not that old, but it's like from the 60s or 70s, I believe. And it was about using the metaphor or analogy of turtles moving on a screen to teach kids object-oriented programming. Sorry, we just got. I don't want to derail you too
no,
much.
that's all right.
Okay,
That's all right.
sorry.
That's all right. But this
Okay,
stuff is hard. So RDF it's not as well known as property graphs, because property graphs are they are kind of easier to understand. But as you said, graphs are not easy to visualize. I I've almost given up in some cases of trying to create visualizations when I do this kind of content, because graphs don't visualize well. Matter of fact, this is that was kind of the thing that Neo4j really, that was their claim to fame, was their graph visualizer, so that you could have these nodes on a screen, these balls that are connected, and you could you could grab one and you could drag it around, or you could click it and it would show you all this info, all the properties for that node, or all that properties for that relationship. And then you could start saying, well, you could basically start highlighting how one node connected to another with all these relationships, and people went, wow, that's really cool. But that's not how people tend to operationalize graphs. When again, somebody's trying to make a credit card transaction and you're trying to determine in less than a second whether or not it's fraudulent. There's not somebody somewhere on a screen with a graph in front of them, they're clicking nodes and they're dragging it over here. It's not like, that scene in Minority Report where Tom Cruise has had the screen, so you grabbing things and pulling them over there. This is all software with Exactly. This is all automated where you already have these retrieval algorithms in place that are then querying the graph based on, how it's structured, which again, a lot of times might be an ontology, especially now and again, that was the first, I talked about earlier, seeing the outpouring of interest for this concept of context graphs. The first one we saw for ourselves personally at TrustCraft, where there was this outpouring of interest for something we never guessed, was ontologies. And that one really took us by surprise, how many people are looking at using ontologies for operationalizing AI systems. And that was another thing that a lot of people have strongly bristled at, in that, the first article that was written about this topic is they made it sound like ontologies were something that you always build yourself, which kind of is, again, that's what Palantir has done. So a lot of people just think Palantir is the only one that does this, when if you talk to people in finance, supply chain, retail, there are so many ontologies that get used for this. Matter of fact, I mean, I posted about this, at NRF, last week. That's a national retail. It's a huge retail show. Google announced, what's it called? UCP, Universal Commerce Protocol, and a big, 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 big,
I
big part of that is it's an ontology in the schema.org style, specifically for retail to use with AI.
help me understand ontology, I guess, from a different
Mhm.
perspective, or like for anybody out here who doesn't know it as well as you do. Is there another way that you can help a general layman understand what ontology really is?
I'll try. I'll try. I will. Unfortunately, we're splitting semantic hairs with all of this stuff, but that's
Okay.
kind of the point. Is that we're now getting into a world where when you build these autonomous systems, you have to split semantic hairs to get the accuracy and
Yeah.
precision you need to be able to trust that the system will operate the way you want it to. So there's four terms that are related that I think get confused. There's vocabularies, taxonomies, schemas, and ontologies. So we know what a vocabulary is. That's how we take a term and we give it a definition. A taxonomy is when you have hierarchies of vocabularies. So that you would have, a vocabulary specifically for a specific domain. That's taxonomies. So a schema, as we know, is when you do a machine readable way of kind of creating like key value pairs, like, SQL tables, schemas, stuff like that. Ontologies are when you bring it kind of all together. You have definitions of terms, you have hierarchies of those definitions of terms, you have all those machine readable key value pairs, and that all gets stored in an ontology. But the use case really always for ontologies was being able to share information. Remember, it's a semantic web concept, and the idea and promise of the semantic web was having a standardized way of exchanging information, which again, look at schema.org. Google created a standard way for you to put information in your website so that the Google search algorithm knew how to present that information to people. So, and it is mind blowing if you just start digging there are so many ontologies that are in use today for supply chain. There's so many. There's so many ontologies for the finance world, really, really big ones. Um, Defense
Yeah.
uses a lot
So
of ontologies. Yes, go ahead.
So then
Yes, go ahead.
if I play back sort of just to try and
Hmm.
catch up to you then,
Hmm.
so an ontology, if you're saying, is like to take all that and then um, I guess it's the furthest layer of building a graph. Uh, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, so when we were talking about having acronyms and being cryptic, but there's insiders who know what that means,
Yeah.
it's hard to for any outsider to understand that. So a machine's not going to be able to understand it until it then gets labeled and classified as, well, in this building, if you're in insurance and we use these terms, right,
Right.
you can have a 3-letter acronym that means something different inside of this building
Exactly.
than if I went over to the military base and they had
Right.
a different meaning to the exact same acronym. So that's why I guess just playing it back to you,
Hmm.
there's layers to this, right? And then I think
Oh
you
yes.
said that the
Oh
ontologies
yes.
is there's lots of ontologies, but that means somebody, and correct me if I'm wrong, has sort of built the framework around something where they've
Hmm.
classified
Hmm.
all of that,
Yes,
these attributes to
absolutely.
have meaning.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. But because, like I said, this technology, and I think that's one of the things that so many of us kind of took. We're surprised that the original article about context graphs kind of tried to portray that this is something that is new or people do this bespoke every single time. Is that there are huge systems in operation today that are based off industry standard ontologies. Matter of fact, you'll find ontologies in all sorts of weird places. The BBC's website, of all places, they have published ontologies on their website. Like they have published ontologies for recipes. Like if there's I think if you just go to bbc.uk, maybe slash ontologies, it might be as simple as that. They have a whole page of ontologies, and they're all in RDF format because um, again, it's all about exchanging information so that you have that base structure that then when you put in so you take recipe structure. So basically they come up with an ontology on how to structure cooking recipes, whether it's like how you label the ingredients, how you label the processes, how you label how you do these things and how they relate to other recipes. So once you have it in a graph, you can begin to see like, oh, what's similar between, baking a cake and making a jambalaya? Is there anything? Maybe there is. Maybe there are some shared ingredients. Maybe there's not. Or maybe all of a sudden you're like, oh, this process that you use here gets used way over here. And again, that's where graphs that's what they're used for, is finding these connections, finding relationships between information that you initially didn't know were related.
Yeah. It's like it's such a for somebody who's like is naturally curious like myself. I love discovering new things, right? And it's kind of boring when the world is like sometimes feels like it's all been
Hmm.
discovered before. But when
Hmm.
yeah, when you look at the relationships of patterns between events and there's just something there that you see that you're like, wow, like um that's interesting to me. It's like uncovering some new insight under a rock,
Right.
and you're like,
And
wow, I think
right.
I see a
And
pattern that nobody else has seen because you're looking between the nodes to try and see, well, I wonder
right.
how that event related to this and
Right.
what was all going on before a series of
I,
events that led to that.
I, well, I've met people
Go
that
ahead.
have even they've talked about that exact experience like years ago when somebody showed them Neo4j and they were able to click a node and drag it around and trace where all the relationships, and they're the exact same experience that you're describing, that sense of wonder and amazement of like, wow, I can do this with this technology. But then there's also that disconnect of individually as just a thought experiment or a personal personal interest, that's a fun way of exploring information. But when you're doing it, at scale for enterprise scale data and the requirements you have on how long it takes to do this sort of decision making or be able to understand the information, you can't really sit there with the graph and trace out nodes, unfortunately. And I've also
Yeah.
had people from
Yeah,
Neo4j
you're
tell me it's about 50-50. It's about 50-50 on
okay.
people that like to use the graph visualizers and people that don't. And I've been very, very outspoken and very vocal. Everybody knows I don't like graph visualizers. I'm in that 50%.
Well, I agree. I think they have a place, and it's very niche, right? It's
Hmm.
interacting with data when I'm maybe potentially in exploratory mode, but yeah, most of the times when we're searching for information, we're trying to execute fast and
Right.
not waste any time at all. So yeah, it has its time, its place. I agree, at least from my perspective, hyper niche exploratory mode, but
And there's some really
in
pretty
the
graph visualizers out there. Somebody asked the other day, uh, if you've ever seen Graphistry, it's beautiful. I mean, it looks amazing. But I go, I'm not going to use this for fraud
yeah,
detection,
exactly.
for
So
fiction.
yeah, and then to pivot that to AI, and what I've been thinking about literally last week, and I'm building something around this right now, is yeah. So even the fact that I did like this exploratory mode of it before, we're entering into an era where there's going to be less and less humans looking at this web pages, right? I'm just going to send my agent to wherever I need something. Like right now, I'm working on getting electronic gear. I'm looking at a drum machine for this voice hackathon we're running in February, and I'm shopping
Hmm.
for a new drum machine. So
Hmm.
I love the exploratory side of going in through YouTube or whatever. But when I get close to like making a decision, I just want to go send an agent to go, okay, find me the best price, closest to me, boom, 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 and come back to me with the results, right? So I think we're going to increasingly get towards an era where there's going to be less visual need for looking at data. Not it won't completely go away, at least the way that I see it, but I'm going to see more and more agents going to traverse information
Right.
spaces and fields
Right.
and coming and bringing that data back to me, which I'm quite
Mm.
excited about, to tell you the truth,
Yeah. Well,
because it means
yeah.
less screen
Well,
time, stealing us away from human interaction.
right. Well, and that kind of gets to
I got
some.
another question. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry,
Okay.
go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Daniel, if you want to add to that.
Well, no, I was just going to say quickly that, and that's why we see not necessarily the word trust being thrown around a lot now, but we see a lot of interest in what's kind of being labeled as the new era of determinism. Is determinism is a term that had a very strict definition in computing for a very, very long time. But now that we're entering a world with these probabilistic systems, we're having to think, what does determinism mean? And I'm actually working on a new article on this, right now, because again, I came from the safety critical world. So I know very, very well, what determinism means in that world. And, dealing with DO 178 and 254, which are the most rigorous safety is the most rigorous software standard on earth is DO 178. And the amount of work that you have to do to try to certify that software is deterministic has actually lost meaning in today's world. And that was a lot of the issue with the Boeing 737 Max issue in its software, is that this was certified. How can this be in there? It's like, well, if you look at the process of verifying that it was deterministic, it's still very human, and it's very design oriented and process and structure. And when you have hundreds of millions of lines of code, there's no way that a human reviewer can review all this and see every potential permutation of edge case of how this software can interact with each other, which is why, and now with LLMs, which are probabilistic by nature, we're really having to rethink what that term means and what that means to, like what you're saying. I want to be able to just give an agent my request, and I want it to come back to me when it's done. And I don't want to have to worry that maybe it didn't do what I wanted. So how do we get there?
Yeah. Yeah, this is going into new territory where exactly. I will have agents doing like things that are non-critical, but I don't want agents building airplanes and bridges. So I think I don't want to see us lose what, is rigorous engineering, and maybe the maybe there's we hit the renaissance, but we're going to learn how to use this new digital fire or tool, and we're going to probably break some plates along the way. But
Oh yeah.
and we're going way over because this is just so good, Daniel. What a great conversation. Um, but let's try and close it in to keep it under an hour. And then if maybe we do another call another day, because I think you and I could probably talk for days on this. But there's one thing I wanted to ask
Sure,
you
let's do it. Sure,
about
let's do it.
graphs, and that
Okay.
is there a way to help the audience think about it from first principles or an atomic scale? And what I mean by that is like, can I have something as simple to say, I know, two nodes, me and you talking right now,
Hmm.
and the information between or
Hmm.
the connections between is this story that how did we ever come to connect with each other? Is that the fundamental first principle or basic unit of a graph, and then it just grows in complexity from there? Or do you have a better way that you think about the very smallest unit of what a graph can be? And
Well, the
it's kind of
smallest
the
unit of what a graph can be is the triple. A subject, predicate,
yeah,
a
okay.
subject, and we always use this example. So again, years ago, I started trying to learn RDF and was just absolutely mystified by it. So Mark, the co-founder of TrustCraft, actually wrote a guide for me on how you build RDF, and he used, because we always joke about his cat Fred. So his a whole RDF guide was written about Fred. And so I use this simple statement about how Fred has four legs. And how does that become a triple? Well, some people started out in the information theory word going subject, verb, object. So it would have been Fred has four legs. But they quickly realized that verbs don't really provide a lot of information. And then you have a lot of information in the predicate of the sentence that kind of points to an object. So they said, well, instead of it being subject verb object, it should be subject predicate object. So in a statement that Fred has four legs, how does that become a subject predicate object? It becomes Fred is the subject, four is the object, and the predicate would be has legs. So a subject predicate object would be Fred has legs, four. And that's a really simple explanation of how you take a statement and you convert it to subject, predicate, object. And matter of fact, so, and also the guide that Mark wrote for me is actually linked. We have it in our GitHub, and it's linked in my context graph manifesto if anybody's interested in it. Because then you start getting into all the other things that you need with that. Like all of a sudden you need to label that, Fred is a cat. Then you start needing, well, I need to create a type for cats. And then I have to create a hierarchy for cats, is that they're a mammal. And that you start creating all this other structure, and that you end up with this, this ontology then about how that it all of a sudden I can start populating all sorts of other related information in this structure, and you'd be able to query it. So at the atomic level, it's all about the subject, predicate, object, and the entire world of RDF and property graphs is how do you operationalize that and the different perspectives on that. And then we get into the whole world of reification, which is an entirely other topic that I even wrote another article about that's even more abstract
I
and
know
critical
I
to
haven't
how
gotten
you
to that one.
operationalize it. Yeah, and it's, I just to tease it a little bit, um, reification is a very ambiguous concept. And I looked for a good definition, and the best definition I found was reification is statements about statements. And I've shared that definition with a lot of people, and they go, huh?
Like
And I go,
metadata, I guess.
huh?
Is that
Well, yeah, yeah, it is. But it's the mechanics of how you, but it's not just metadata necessarily. It's about once I have Fred has four legs, all the things that I can attach to that statement. Like I can attach that Mark told me that it was Fred has four legs. When did Mark tell me that Fred has four legs? Who did Mark tell has
very
four
cool?
legs? Is this actually true or not? Or you could begin to add all that sort of other information. And then this was the thing I think going back
Temporal.
to yeah, going back to the decision trace concept that was initially in the initial context graph article, is that once that once information gets used in a system, like you've taken context from this mother graph, this potentially trillion node edge graph, and you've used it in a request. Now I'll take those relationships that I use, and I can add additional context that was used by Claude 4.5 haiku on this date, and this was the request, this was the response, this is the agent that used it, these are all the parameters that were used. And all of a sudden you start adding more data to that. So then you can start to do graph analytics, and you can start to see, well, this piece of information, the context graph, has been used a lot. or this hasn't been used at all, or like, wait, this piece of context way over here was used, and this piece of context way over here was used too. There's no relationships between them, but for this request, they were related. Why is that? You could start to build relationships in that way, because all of a sudden you could just, you see like, well, these related ideas were needed to process this request, so they must be related in some way as well, or they're related to the user.
Yeah,
So
love it.
reification, although it's abstract, is how we're actually going to
Yeah,
accomplish a lot of this stuff.
and if I had to play it back, is that like sort of like the process of understanding? I don't know if that's the best way to sort of think about it, but
That's a
what you
very
just
human,
described is a bunch of events.
that's a very human
Yeah, okay.
concept. And that's an intangible that a lot of people have tried to understand. And again, another one, it's really hard to have this conversation and not talk about behavioral economics and game theory and prospect theory and the work of people like, Daniel Kahneman. And I quote his work, quite a bit, in showing that
Okay.
how humans make decisions, how they process information to make those decisions. And, his entire work was about how humans incorrectly process information to make decisions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, like Michael Levin in this book really gave me a different perspective biologically towards
Mm-hmm.
how I process
Mm-hmm.
make any decision because, inherently we're all projecting
Mm-hmm.
and making sense of the world in real
Mm-hmm.
time all the time. So, I mean, how I made a decision this morning is going to be different than how I make a decision this afternoon. And it's quite crazy when you go down this rabbit hole. But you name dropped a couple things there, and that's related to one of the closing questions that I wanted to ask you. What do you
Mm-hmm.
want to leave people with? Is that like
Mm-hmm.
maybe they should go down a rabbit hole with these people that you mentioned before, or is there anything else you want to leave people with that you think
I
they
always
should know
recommend
about if they're
people
interested?
study behavioral economics. I always
Cool.
recommend that. And interestingly enough, um, so if you might have remembered in AI, especially like I guess it would have been last year, all of a sudden people started talking about system one and system two a lot. Those were actually terms
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Daniel Kahneman used in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. But when
Oh,
I
I didn't
saw,
know that. I used the
yeah, yeah. But the weird thing was when I saw how people in AI were using the system one and system two in what they were talking about, I went, I don't think you guys actually read Kahneman's work, because um, you're kind of missing all of the things that he said, like why that was important and why this actually causes, problems. He wasn't arguing that this was a good thing. He was just arguing is that this is the data shows this is how humans think.
yeah, exactly. And I argue like what in what part of the product phase should you be in these frameworks of mind, right? Like so surface level interaction, fast interaction,
Right.
you don't need to be in deep
Right.
thinking mode, right? But when you're trying to figure out, okay, well, why is the customer having a problem to begin with?
Right.
You're going to have to go down some journeys to figure out where this friction lies. So love this, man. We could talk for days, but okay. So but we can't. So let's pack it up here. What yeah, and then say like, okay, for the people that are interested in either context or graphs, if there's anything else that you think that can help people get unlocked to learn more, you've name dropped a couple people. Anything else, or would you just also like to share how people can find you? Because I'm sure, like, I'm learning a ton from you, and I'm going to keep following your work. So, what would you like to
I'm
leave people with, Daniel?
I'm pretty easy to find. You can find me on X at Trust Spooky, where I have the Context Graph Manifesto. I have a follow-up piece called Context Graphs, uh, Reification, Not Decision Traces. I'm currently working on a new article that I tentatively titled The New Era of Deterministic Engineering. I have a video on YouTube. If you just go to, at Trust Graph AI, called What is a Context Graph? If you Google Trust Graph, you'll find us. Daniel Davis on LinkedIn. Um, TrustGraph.ai has all of our links. And for me, I always say, I'm always frustrated by how people are unwilling to take into account history, because if you study history on these ideas, you realize that people have been working on this for decades, if not longer. And not
Yeah.
only that, a lot of this stuff was actually kind of theoretically solved a long time ago. And they just didn't have the technology, the compute really, to make it work. So all of these
Yeah.
old ideas are not just valid, they're still the correct ideas. So we don't necessarily need, there's so much we can learn from the history of this field and how we can actually solve the problems of today, because we now have the capability to implement the solved theory that might be 60 and 70 years old. So I really hope that people start, how do I want to say this? There's a wealth of information out there that might be very old and in trapped in dusty books that don't look interesting at all. But if we can just get away from a few seconds of believing that all information has to be in 140 characters on a scroll on our phone, there's a wealth of illumination waiting for us in the work of people, very, very smart people that came before us.
Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of giants is cliche, but so true. And it reminds me that the book that I wanted to mention earlier about turtles, or it was called Mindstorms by Seymour Paper. And
Mm,
it's children, computers, and powerful
mm,
ideas, all about logo, how it was invented, and how it works. I don't know if that's related to the same turtle thing that you were talking about, but on
mhm,
the idea that
mhm,
we should uncover these old stories and look back to understand how things come before us. These are all patterns that are just getting passed and remixed. So this was such an
mhm,
amazing show. Daniel, thank
mhm,
you so much for sitting down with me. You dropped how people could find you so that if this is on a audio
mhm,
podcast, they can do that. For people that
mhm,
want to follow me that aren't watching a video, I'm Ian Timotheos Pilon, and you can find me on X as well at Ian Timotheos. And yeah, this was super exciting, Daniel. Thank you. Looking forward to following more of your work to come. So appreciate you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Ian.